Comencem a registrar.
Hola, molt bon dia a totes i a tots.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this second session of the cycle organized by Diplocat and the Barcelona Time Use for a Healthy Society to develop time use policies. And we're here to discuss mobility policies and proximity and 15-minute policies. My name is Alexis Serra. I was the director of the Time Use Reform Office for the Catalan government until last week, and I coordinated the network of municipalities for the time use reform. I'm here to share with you a couple of ideas to start with today's session. I want to share with you 4 very clear situations. In current times, we see a response to these very hectic paces of living that we have experienced in recent years. We are living through times of equality between men and women, between private and public issues. For example, we have a regional ministry of feminism and equality. And we are also experiencing the challenges and the goals set by the 2030 agenda and the sustainable transformation. Digitization has a direct impact on our daily lives. And we will live from the learnings that we have drawn from these very unfortunate pandemic. So society and politicians need to react, and we need to respond with local policies from the local level. So we need time use policies that aim at achieving welfare. We need to take on this time use perspective in local policymaking, which means that any local policy has to include the time use factor so that we focus on that and we strike a new balance among time uses. And we should be able to manage time more efficiently to achieve equal distribution of time and time use between men and women and between home chores and more work-related matters so that we can lead more healthy lives and to stop wasting time. And that's why time use policies are so important, and they have to be turned into public policies. They have to guide us through a cross-cutting perspective. They have to be allocated budget, resources. They have to be assessed, and they have to contribute to our well-being. And that's why we have to work through digitization for our citizens. We have to include the notion of the municipality of the 15 minutes. And it's very important to do that in local policy making. We have to reshuffle our time uses, especially in our municipalities, which means that we will have to work closely together with all public administrations. We have to focus on promotion and awareness raising policies and including everyone. I'm talking about participatory processes. In Catalonia, that's what we have in the shape of local time use pacts. So we need to do that through a strategy and coordination among public authorities at different levels so that we're all on the same page. Today in the network, we have 181 municipalities of Catalonia, 10 county councils and the 4 provincial councils that we have in Catalonia. So it's the right time to define a global strategy for time use policies in the local administration. I think that we should focus much more on this notion of time use policies. We should keep building alliances among administrations that is yielding very good results, and it has yielded very good results to date, and we should strengthen our alliances in Europe. If we join our strengths at a European level, we will be better off and we will achieve our goal of time use policies for our citizens. And we have to include the local administrations. They have to take on these time use policies to achieve a better life for everyone. So we need urban time use policies for a better, more egalitarian and efficient society. That's about it from my part. Enjoy this session. I will stay to listen in, and I hand it over now to the moderator of the second session of this cycle, Eva Garcia, who is a senior researcher for the Global Cities Program at the CIDOP Research Center. Eva, over to you. Thank you very much, Alexis. Good morning, everyone. Let's start this discussion about the 15-minute city and sustainable mobility that is framed in this cycle of 3 sessions on municipal practices and time use policies. Today, we are holding the second session, and we are here to discuss a notion that is not a novelty, but it has regained visibility lately with the convergence of 2 big crises that were basically characterizing 2020. On the one hand, we have the climate crisis, and on the other hand, we have the health crisis because of the COVID-19 pandemic breakout. So this is a notion that has regained visibility lately because these 2 crises have resulted in a need to make headway towards an environmental transition, to make policies in terms of the environment, and the need to focus on proximity. Because in current times, because of health reasons and of public health reasons, urban mobility has been restricted to stop the propagation of the pandemic. So life in the neighborhood has recovered and regained a new meaning. So this proposal that we are offering here today puts together environmentalism on the one hand and proximity on the other, because we are setting this maximum period of time, 15 minutes, for a citizen to commute between home and the different basic services for that person's well-being and daily life. So the 15-minute city has different levels to it and different implications, for example, of course, in terms of sustainable mobility, and we will dwell on that today, because basically it aims to reduce dramatically CO2 intensive commutings. It has implications in terms of access to basic services and access to work, because it basically aims to decentralize the commuting and focus on the neighborhood. And it has a very strong impact on the link with your area of residence. That's the district, the neighborhood. And that reinforces neighborhood life, and it aims to re-establish links with your district. And of course, this sustainable mobility, well-being, decentralization, strengthening of the links with your territory, they all invite us to make headway towards a change of paradigm in terms of the urban model, that is the way we plan and design our cities, but also a change of paradigm regarding our lifestyle, that is the way we organize our time, our daily commuting, etc. And to discuss in depth all of these, we have 3 guest speakers. They will tell us about the implementation of this notion, the 15-minute city, in different European cities. We will specifically touch on the experience of Paris, Milan, and of course, our proximity, Barcelona. Alexiane Zelinsky will talk about Paris. She works at the mobility agency of the transport department at the Paris Town Council, and she will tell us about the very much needed transformation of public space so that the 15-minute city can come true. To know about Milan, we have with us Francesca Zacic. She is an advisor of time use for the Milan Town Council, and she will tell us about how to build this city of proximities. And finally, we will hear from Mariona Conill. She's an engineer at the Mobility, Transport and Sustainability Department of the Barcelona Metropolitan Area. And she will tell us about how to implement sustainable mobility at a metropolitan level. Without further ado, I hand it over to Alexiane to tell us about the experience of Paris and their implementation of the 15-minute city notion. Alexiane, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexiane Zelinska. I'm project manager in the City Hall of Paris. I'm going to share my screen so that everyone can see my presentation, I hope. So today I'm presenting about transforming the public space for a 15-minute city through the Paris experience. So first, I would like to give a word about what is 15-minute city in our Parisian regard. So to implement a 15-minute city, we want to have multi-purpose sites. That means that we need places that Parisians can appropriate and use for different purposes through proximity, usage density, and modularity in a very dense city like Paris. We would like to implement the 15-minute city in Paris to reach 3 specific goals: to have a zero-emission city by 2050, to enhance our quality of life, and to have a city that will be more resilient and more united. How do we implement a 15-minute city in Paris? So our method is based on 3 major objectives that are to create respiration zones in a dense city so that everyone can have a cool area within 15 minutes walk or bike. We want to create new places for friendliness, for meeting, to have a better and more lively neighborhood. And we want to develop local services, stores, and facilities. And we have 2 priorities in this method that are isolated and less mobile public. So we want to focus on disabled people, elderly, children, and we also want to go in places where local facilities lack, and we target working class neighborhoods first. Our approach is very much concerted and participative, so we include all residents, local stakeholders to create these lively districts around 3 types of urban commons that are public facilities. So for example, I'm going to elaborate on how we open schools to neighborhood. Public space, we try to free them from cars and encourage active mobility. And also we focus on ground floors to make them more lively. So now I would like to go deeper into a case study to elaborate on Paris experience in transforming the public space towards a 15-minute city. And I'm going to speak about a program that is called in French, embellir votre quartier. That means make your neighborhood more beautiful, embellish your neighborhood. So we really want to go at the scale of neighborhood, take a neighborhood that is approximately 30,000 inhabitants. So you have an example here. It's a district called Château Rouge. And we condense all our public space project toward the 15-minute city in these districts. So we take 1 neighborhood per district. We have 17 districts in Paris, and each year we do 17 districts. So we revegetate, we reduce car traffic, we widen walkways, we turn public parking spots, into green and shared spaces. We develop accessibility, cycle routes, school streets, and so on. So how does this approach works? So our method is to have a very much participative approach and consulted one. So first we have open meeting based on a very deep diagnosis of the neighborhood, and we give strategic orientations, objectives about how we want to transform this neighborhood toward a 15-minute city. Then we go through a part that is the consultation one. We walk around the neighborhood with the residents, with stakeholders. We ask them about their ideas, their propositions. They can also contribute online. And then we integrate all these feedbacks in our diagnosis, and we go through the technical study part and a part of construction that will last about a year, and then we try to animate these places and develop programming. So the major stake of this program is to adapt it to local needs and local specificities. I just want to give a focus on one of the projects of this program of embellishing the neighborhood, that are the schools that we want to turn into the capitals of the 15-minute neighborhoods. So we take the schoolyards, we vegetate them, we open them to the public, to the neighborhood, so that everyone can come, participate to sportive event, sport event, a cultural event, or sort of workshops, or any programming we can propose. And also what we do with the streets is that we close the car circulation in front of it, so that all the residents can benefit from this new urban park and appropriate it. So here you have some pictures about what we did to go very fast in closing more than 100 streets in front of schools in Paris, with, you can see, planters of vegetation and barriers, so that cars cannot cross anymore, and we can secure children in front of our schools and reduce pollution and noise pollution as well. And then with these freed up spaces, we program events, we gather people, children and elderly and older residents in this new park, a new urban park, to have entertainment and animation. Thank you, I'm done with this first part. I'm going to give the floor back to Eva.
Molt bé, moltíssimes gràcies, Alexian.
Thank you very much, Alexian, for having given us this snapshot about what it means to implement this 15-minute city and how necessary this transformation of urban space was. I would like to underline a couple of things amongst the many aspects that you presented. First, this need to assign different kinds of usages to the different areas in the city, as opposed to the dominant urban model that has been in place for decades now, based on functional town planning, and the different areas that every city had only one role or one possible usage. Whereas in the 15-minute city, as you were saying earlier, we're trying to instill a paradigm shift. And one of the key issues here is to provide different kind of usages or purposes to city areas. Carlos Moreno, who is one of the greatest theoreticians about the 15-minute city, who has been at the forefront of many political actions also in Paris, calls this chronotopy. So this adaptation of town planning so that the city can have different purposes. There's another thing that you mentioned that is quite interesting, how to embellish urban space. That's not the term that many people use, but this has a key impact in terms of creating new links and with the territory, and feeling that you are living at a space in which there's a lot of well-being and offers you a quality of living. This is, I believe, a fundamental aspect, and it's once again another indicator of this paradigm shift that the 15-minute city is bringing about. Now we'll give the floor to Francesca Zajic, who will be talking to us about how Milan is working in order to deploy the city of proximity. Francesca, the floor is yours whenever you wish.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? I can begin.
Yes, you can begin, Francesca.
Okay, thank you. With the first lockdown in Milan, what perhaps was a simple intuition has become a necessity. Time, considered by all to be a certain fact, never questioned, has become a precious quality asset. The administration started to act on space. The idea was to propose to citizens an adjustment and adaptation of the organization of urban life, which on the one hand rewarded a spatial dimension of proximity, therefore also insisted with very concrete and medium or short-term tools on an enhancement of spaces near the neighborhoods. An example can come from the so-called table resolution in favor of bars and restaurants, which could not accommodate customers inside the premises. A different use of public space outside that, thanks to a free concession from the municipality, brought back to life and reappropriated the proximity space to citizens with new administrative tools. Another example is tactical urbanism, restoring a more collective dimension of sociality of the community space with seats, greenery, flooring, coloring. And this was done especially near the schools. Furthermore, a lot has been invested in slow and sustainable mobility, increasing the kilometers for bicycle and motorbike sharing and also favoring walking. Therefore, a dimension of space used in a different way has also allowed us to think in a different way about the times of urban, economic, and social life and about entertainment. In this context, at the end of the first lockdown, long lockdown, the measure asked the councillors to try to carry out a planning exercise, basically an exercise for a new normal, an exit strategy from the first critical phase of the health emergency. 3 departments, mobility, urban planning, and city times, have produced a document which has partly taken up the philosophy of the city at 15 minutes and has focused on 2 dimensions to be kept interconnected, the dimension of space and the dimension of time. The document was drawn up in December 2020 with the title Milan 2020 Adaptation Strategy. Therefore, a new territorial schedule plan whose specificity is the transversality of the temporal dimension, both in the lives of individuals and in the social organization of urban space. A new city management tool through the organization of time, from timetables to accessibility. The important thing is that this situation has also offered administrators extraordinary planning tools. In fact, with the ordinary legislative instruments, the capacity for action towards a new organization of the times at the urban level of the municipality was very limited by rules and customs. We can summarize the temporal replanning of the city according to 3 main objectives present in the document. One, the dilution of the demand for private and public mobility throughout the 24 hours of the day, which is accompanied by a great boost in cycling and walkability. Secondly, a flexibility and desynchronization of the start and end times of public service activities, especially social educational, schools, commercial and recreational activities. Finally, the theme of proximity, a space-time concept that presupposes everything 15 minutes away, a sort of community neighborhood in which physical proximity access to public services is guaranteed, first of all, but not only, also favoring their use through digital services. This is the first part of my speech. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Francesca. You're actually helping us to supplement what Alexian said at the beginning. As I was saying earlier, the way the city of Paris is working in order to implement this 15-minute city is based about this idea by Carlos Morena of chronotopy, the fact that different urban spaces can have different purposes simultaneously. And after hearing Francesca, it is obvious that the time factor has to be introduced in urban planning, which is also called chrono-urbanism or chrono-town planning. This might be a bit complex as a term, but I believe they are a testament of this need, as Alexis was saying at the beginning, to integrate time use policies in town planning, in urban policies. And that means that time has to be integrated in town planning, which is not always the case. It's a dimension that has been neglected in the past. And everything has depended on urban structures and how to organize cities so that, these structures could have a place and play a specific role. So town planning should adjust to the uses that we find in cities and not to structures. And as I was saying earlier, this is quite an important paradigm shift. Next, we give the floor to Mariona Cunill, who will be talking to us about the strategy of the Barcelona Metropolitan Area in terms of mobility. And we are going to dwell on one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning, sustainable mobility as a backbone and a common thread of this idea of the 15-minute city. So Mariona, the floor is yours, whenever you're ready. Great. Thank you. Good morning. As you already said, the 15-minute city is a concept that is based on re-urbanizing, thinking about land uses and the role of time in our lives. However, thinking about already planned territories and those that remain to be properly planned, mobility plays a very important role. By planning mobility from a point of view of health, sustainability, efficiency, and equity, we will be able to achieve this goal of proximity amongst the citizens, our homes, our households, and our essential daily activities, work, healthcare, culture, supplies, or sport. So what does the Barcelona Metropolitan Area do from that point of view? Well, it works with many metropolitan municipalities on this idea of 15-minute city at a local scale, but it also works with a broader concept in the whole metropolitan area. So ensuring accessibility to public services within a radius of 45 minutes. Obviously, at a metropolitan area, we cannot ensure that everything will be accessible within 15 minutes because from a geographical and territorial point of view, we're very diverse. We don't have an even dense, compact metropolitan area. We have some cities that are that way, whereas others have different features. So we expand those 15 minutes to 45. And how do we go about that? Well, we will explain this further afterwards, but obviously mobility is key for the whole territory, and it makes it possible to ensure that proximity in time. However, we should also notice that this is a joint task between different departments at the Barcelona Metropolitan Area. We work with the Economic Development Department and the Territory Department. And we also work on social cohesion, economic activity, and mobility, amongst others, such as how to define land users. That's how we develop projects and plans such as the APROPAM, the Urban Master Plan, or the Metropolitan Urban Mobility Plan, the PMMU. They all wish to promote this social cohesion of our territory as a key element to achieve the sustainable development goals, which is indispensable to dynamize our social and economic life. Now, let me focus on the PMMU, which is fostered by our area of mobility, transport, and sustainability. It is the frame of reference for all sustainable urban mobility plans of the 36 municipalities in this area. It is a strategic and action plan as well on mobility in the whole area. It defines general guidelines, strategic guidelines, but it also lists specific measures that need to be implemented. And our authority will have to promote this in coming years between 2019 and 2024. But the main goal of this plan is none other than to improve the quality of life in the metropolis through the promotion of actions in the field of mobility that promote sustainability and planned health, that ensure economic and social progress of our citizenry, as well as the metropolitan territory, and that promote social cohesion. So it is based on the 4 strategic pillars that is making healthier, sustainable, more efficient and equitable mobility. And as I said earlier, we need them to create this 45-minute metropolis, fostering proximity. Even though this plan does not have as its main objective to achieve that concept of a 45-minute metropolis, it's not written anywhere, it is not our main goal, it does define the different action plans and measures that will allow us to bring this approach, this proximity of people to essential public services in their daily lives. So all of these measures, or the majority of them, as I will say later, will help us come closer to this idea of the 15-minute city at a local level and 45-minute in terms of the whole metropolitan area. So we will be increasing the quality of life of our people, and we will foster the sense of belonging to the area of residence and the metropolis itself. Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Mariona. After listening to you, it becomes apparent how complex it is to roll out that idea, that's a proposal of the 15-minute city at a metropolitan scale. Obviously, it might not be as easy as to address this challenge at a local level. In Europe, we have very dense, compact cities. And the fact that we have multiple urban centers and we need to ensure access to public services and other opportunities, it might be easier in small cities. However, at a metropolitan scale, it is very difficult. And in order to overcome this challenge, we need to promote sustainable mobility, obviously, which is in keeping with this need that I pointed out to begin with, the need to move forward in terms of environmental transformation. So it is indeed fundamental to think about this when we talk about 15-minute cities. Sustainable mobility, when we talk about this idea, we use the term active mobility. And later on, when we hear our colleagues from Paris and Milan, I'm sure that they can tell us more about this active mobility idea, how to reinforce the fact that we can walk or take our bikes or use other less polluting vehicles as a sustainable alternative, which is once again essential to provide access to the necessary urban services for our day-to-day. So after having heard our colleagues from these 3 different cities, Paris, Milan, and Barcelona, we will now dwell on each and every one of these experiences a bit further. So I would like to ask Alexiane a question so that she can elaborate a bit further on some of the ideas that she mentioned at the beginning. When you first spoke, you told us about how Paris is approaching this transformation of public space so that you can move towards this 15-minute city idea. But in terms, not only acting on town planning, because we already established this is a fundamental issue, mobility is also seen as a key notion to work on. So how can we see, we were hearing our colleague from Barcelona, how do you guys in Paris are working in order to promote this kind of more sustainable or active mobility? What would be the role that sustainable mobility can play in Paris to move towards this city, 15-minute city? The floor is yours, Alexiane.
Thank you very much, Eva, for your question. I'm going to share my screen again for you guys. I hope you can see it. So yeah, your question is very interesting on how we can develop proximity through promoting active mobility. And in fact, in Paris, we want to change paradigm and go from a car city to a cycling and walking city. That's why we accompany a rebalancing trend and try to change a mobility behavior to go from forced mobility by car and long distance to proximity 15-minute walk or bike to work or for any of our displacement in Paris. So we want to develop shared, active and clean mobility, provide more space for pedestrians, reduce car traffic to encourage cycling. And we can see today that over half of the journey in Paris are made on foot. And you can see this in the graph, that are only the travel inside Paris, so from Paris to Paris. And you can see that walking is really a major part of the modal share in Paris. It's more than 60%, and it's still increasing through years. You can see also that car traffic is decreasing, and it's already below 10%. And cycling is slowly increasing, but you can see that we still have a way to go. We want to give Paris back to pedestrians, and we have a strong project that we are undergoing now that is called Paris Respire Zone Apaisée. That means breathing Paris with a peace zone. And the principle of this project is to implement an area with traffic restrictions. So we do not want transit traffic anymore in this area, in the perimeter you can see on the map. And then this area will be only accessible to entitled users, which mean residents, taxi, public transports, bicycles, pedestrians, of course. And these entitled users are now to be defined during a consultation that we are undergoing in Paris with all the stakeholders to have still this participatory approach for our projects. And the objectives of this project is to encourage cycling and walking, to ease bus circulation, to pacify, to appease local life, and to enhance air quality while reducing noise pollution. Here you have some examples and some pictures about how we secure pedestrian routes and we encourage walking in Paris through designing infrastructure, through pedestrian platform, crossing sidewalks. We also have shared walkways on the bank of the river so that all the different type of active mobility can coexist in the same place. And we also remove parking spots before pedestrian crossings to secure these pedestrian routes. The second part of this active mobility promotion in Paris is, of course, to give back Paris to bicycles. So we want to achieve 100% cycle-friendly capital. Here in the screen, you can see the major network map, that is the metropolitan one. And at the level of Paris, we collaborate closely with the metropolitan, with the greater Paris metropolis, to develop cycling routes, structuring a line so that we can cross the greater Paris by bike. And at the local level, at the 15-minute level, we also link up neighborhoods with more local cycle lanes to the major network. I also wanted to give you a specific example, that is Rue de Rivoli. That is a very famous street in Paris, close by the Louvre Museum. We took this avenue that was a very big avenue with lots of car transiting, and now it is only allowed for residents. The only car that can cross are residents, public transport, taxi, and also delivery men. And we implemented a very large and secured bike lane so that everyone can practice bike with security in our great capital. And from the moment we implemented and we changed this avenue, we already can observe a decrease in noise pollution, actually. Thank you. That was my answer. I give back the floor.
Moltíssimes gràcies, Alexian. Realment la teva resposta ha il·lustrat...
Thank you very much, Alexian. You just discussed what I mentioned before. How can we implement this active mobility, cycling, walking, and how to turn around a paradox that characterizes most cities around the world, which is 80% of the urban space is used by private cars. So can we set these goals and focus on walkability and livability? And can we do that at a metropolitan level? And your explanation links up beautifully with what Mariona said and how they are working as the Barcelona Metropolitan Area to turn that metropolitan area into a more walkable and livable area. And as you said, to do that, we have to establish dialogues with other government levels. So it's a multi-level governance. We need the collaboration between city councils, metropolitan areas. That's key to progress in that sense. Now, I'd like Francesca to tell us more about one aspect of their adaptation strategy in Milan, adaptation to the pandemic, because I think they have been considering different kinds of projects. And one of them is very interesting because it focuses on a key aspect to achieve the 15-minute city, which is access to work, to employment. How can we access our job places if they are located in a different district than ours? So how can we avoid commuting? So in the Milan strategy, they talk about near working. And Francesca, I would like to know what's your approach to the rollout of the near working? How will you go about it? Through which spaces, infrastructures, what kind of funding? Please tell us about it, Francesca.
Thank you. Yes, I want to talk about this this section, but before I'd like to say just 2 words on another important experiment related to the school and public transport. In September 2020, on the occasion of the return to school of the whole children, the central government in Italy issued a rule which entrusted the prefect with the task of coordinating an activity of desynchronization of the city's time with new and extraordinary tools. A table was therefore set up with the participation of different many stakeholders, an expression of different types of timetables in the city. First of all, the schools of different grades, public transport, small and large retail trades, business, association, and so on. This table took a series of decisions. It was decided to desynchronize the entry and exit times of all services and public administration in the city. In this context, the work carried out by individual schools with the agency representing local public transport was very important because the government, in fact, had decided that the load of users on means of transport could not exceed 50% of capacity. There was therefore a difficult mediation job, at the end of which an app was set up that allowed students to book seats up to 50%. It was an exogenous shock that jolted an old and outdated dimension of organization of space and time, and yet difficult to change, but very, very important, and it was a success. And now, talking about near working, it means a working place of proximity of neighborhood, which is a sort of halfway between home working and necessarily face-to-face working offices. The idea is to be able to plan the use of proximity spaces in the city that can be decentralized offices of the municipality, but also underused spaces of large companies and headquarters of multinationals or companies, or even already co-working spaces. I must remember that in Milan, we have a high number of co-working spaces, more thanks to private spontaneous initiatives. We have surveyed over 100 spaces. The aim of the plan is therefore to favor a closeness between home and work, a sort of co-near working for remote work for company employees. With the words of Cristina Tajani, councillor in the municipality for time urban policies, she said, "This measure allows us to experiment with new ways of working within the public administration, proposing first in Italy a model of living and working in a city 15 minutes away, thus favoring the development of neighborhoods with services and new commercial activities with consequent savings in time and emissions deriving from forced travel. The experimentation is part of the general redesign of the city's time due to the COVID emergency, but it represents a valid model in itself to be proposed also to the private sector. A transformation of the organization of work in the municipal public administration that passes from a radical rethinking of the physical places of work, no longer fixed and concentrated, but dynamic and distributed to limit the transfer times between peripheral territories and centrality, helping to develop a real polycentric city. Summarizing, these three objectives can be achieved: decongest public transport by limiting suburban center transfers, improve work-life balance by saving time and pollution emissions, foster the vitality of the neighborhoods, thus contributing to the development of a real polycentric and inclusive city. Last, with this agreement, the municipality also wants a concrete signal for the public-private capacity to create a system for the benefit of the entire territory and the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I think that this proposal that made by Milan about near working, it's very important because decentralizing employment is not an easy task, and that can be a potential solution. And we will keep a close eye on this deployment of your project of near working in Milan to see whether the private sector is encouraged by that and starts using it as an intermediary solution between home office and work in the workplace. So thank you very much also for your initial remark about schools. Actually, both Alexian and yourself have referred on different occasions to schools. And yes, absolutely, schools are a key element of the daily life of many families and individuals. And that takes us to care. Alexis mentioned care work at the beginning in his opening remarks. And throughout the pandemic, we have realized that care work is key in everyone's daily life. So the 15-minute city, without the shade of a doubt, is a proposal that includes these issues. And by granting access to nearby care, well, that's one of the goals that you have set, and that notion is promoting, and especially if we want to achieve true actual equality in terms of gender. So, Mariona, I'd like to invite you to dwell on the 2030 commitment by the Barcelona Metropolitan Area and tell us more about the urban mobility plan that you mentioned in passing. And there's the need to consider the metropolitan area as the intermediary space that is the spine of the 15-minute city and is connected to this 45-minute metropolitan area. You mentioned some of the tools that you want to use to achieve the 45-minute metropolitan area, but please give us more examples about the mobility plan and how you plan to implement this proximity model at a metropolitan area, which is a major challenge to roll out these proposals at a metropolitan level. So it really makes sense for us to identify the tools, the policies, the instruments that will allow us to move forward to this 45-minute metropolitan area. So that's my proposal to you, Mariona. Yes, absolutely. So I will tell you more about the urban mobility plan with six work streams and specific measures and interventions. And I will tell you about the measures that aim to achieve the proximity of the metropolitan area. In terms of the urban model and metropolitan mobility networks, we have a specific action, which is one metropolitan activity for active mobility. So it's about promoting active mobility to connect, to link up all metropolitan municipalities and avoid many commutings with private vehicles. And let me dwell on these. We include measures like expanding what we call BCVia, the bike lane network. We want to expand walkability itineraries also. We want to expand the public bike shared scheme. We have run a pilot. We want it to be present throughout the metropolitan area. We want to implement urban integration projects, permeability and connectivity for pedestrians. And we also want to focus on entertainment. Then we have the B work stream. We want to build healthy, safe streets and avenues. And we have specific measures that are key, such as to improve different parts of the metropolitan urban planning to improve the urban livability. We want to deploy low emissions areas. We have the climate change law that obliges municipalities with over 50,000 inhabitants to have low emission areas. And there is a recommendation for smaller municipalities to deploy these low emission areas too if they have high levels of pollution. Other measures now. We have a metropolitan coordination strategy for universal accessibility or to improve our bike lane network, to implement an urban mobility code for bicycles, to improve parking spaces for bicycles in buildings, to ensure the safety of pedestrians, to reinforce road signposting to improve the visibility of bicycles on the road, and that's for the connection among municipalities, to take part in the deployment of road safety policies. We also work to improve public transport, because obviously at a metropolitan area, not everything can be active mobility, because there are realities that escape that. And we focus on improving public transport. We want a more efficient and better quality in our public transportation network. And then as for proximity measures, we want to improve the services of buses and underground in the metropolitan area. We want to have high-performing metropolitan bus network with more frequency. We want to improve the bus frequency over summer so that we can promote sustainable mobility for tourism purposes or leisure purposes, which are more frequent in summer. We want to improve the bus frequency on weekends and bank holidays, also night buses. We are working very much to improve the public transportation conditions of the second metropolitan area. powers are being granted by the Catalan government to the Metropolitan Authority. And we also have on-demand transportation networks that has been implemented in some municipalities, because there are areas without a frequent public transportation service, but there are on-demand public transportation services, and to improve the environment of bus stops, the access to metro stations, to improve accessibility, universal accessibility, a support program for potential users of public transportation. And then we have another work stream, which is to promote a change of habits, which is key to achieve active mobility and to live in proximity. And the measures that we include here are the following. Sustainable access to the workplace and to the mobility hubs. We want to educate in sustainable mobility. We want to design and implement school paths and itineraries. We also want to include active mobility education in schools, and we want to train our urban police officers in sustainable mobility. We want to raise awareness and promote sustainability in mobility. How? Well, by designing and launching campaigns to raise awareness about walkability, mobility through bicycles, and we want to reduce the general level of emissions. We want to promote awareness-raising campaigns for the logistics industry. This sector is affected by the low emissions areas, so we need to do something with that industry that is closely connected with fossil fuels-based vehicles and transport, and we have to target goods transport, logistics. We have to help them fit with the implementation of sustainable mobility on the territory. Just some ideas and some specific measures that are being implemented by the Transport, Mobility and Sustainability Department of the Metropolitan Authority. Thank you very much, Mariona. And thank you to all of you, to the three of you, for this twofold round of remarks and presentations. Thanks for sharing your proposals with us. Many topics have been brought up, such as the need to transform the urban space to include different usages, how to offer new services for employment possibilities, and how to move forward towards sustainable mobility and reinforcing active mobility. Other things have been mentioned, and they are key to understand the 15-minute city, such as guaranteeing social welfare, focusing on multi-level governance, and the need to involve the citizens in this kind of processes, how important care work is, and the fundamental role of schools in the 15-minute city, the need to embellish the urban space so that we can feel connected to the territory. And having shared these initial proposals and experiences by Paris, Milan, and Barcelona, well, it's not an easy proposal, of course. And I would like you to tell us briefly about the challenges you have faced, or the ones that you're still facing as administrations deploying and implementing these proposals. Could you give a piece of advice to other cities who might be considering walking down that path? So we would start with Alexiane, and in the same order. So Alexiane, tell us about the main challenges that you have faced in Paris, and which would be the piece of advice that you could give to other cities that would like to embark on such a project.
Thank you, Eva, for the question. I'm sharing my screen again. In Paris, I think the major challenges we face are the soft part of the 15-minute city, I would say. We are kind of advanced in the hard part. It means like infrastructure, securing pedestrian cycling routes, and our programs are very much about transforming the public space. But now we need to progress on the soft part. That means to allow the appropriation of urban planning by Parisians, by all our residents, and how we animate the places that were freed up from car or from older usage. So we are now entering into a part that is pacifying the public space through implementing a code of the street. What we want is to make sure that we can share the public space with all the different users, and that in a harmonious way. So we implement street rules, and it's still work we need to go through to raise street sharing awareness so that everyone can use the public space for its own purpose. We also reduce speed. We still develop the hard part of secure infrastructure, but we also try to develop positive communication to be sure that everyone in the public space can have its share in a harmonious way. And we supervise also free-floating engines so that it doesn't display in all the public space without a bit of order. So from this part, we need to go more towards the animating part. And I think it's our challenge today to program, to propose programming and to let our residents appropriate the public space that we freed up from cars, from all the usage, as I said. And the example we are developing in these days are very much the school streets, where we try to have a transversal approach within all the different services in the city hall of Paris to propose diverse programming of these school streets. With sport event, cultural event, workshop, a new type of furniture for the children to play, and all this type of programming we need to develop. We also try to propose more and more we teach how to ride and repair a bike to the young generation to develop this change of behavior with our kids. And we turn parking spots into lively green shared spaces. It's all these new usage we try to develop so that we have more lively neighborhood and more animated ones. Another part of our challenge, I think, is to vegetate more and more our city to be sure that every Parisian have a cool area within 15 minutes walk or bike. And we have new ways of vegetating our city that we develop. So we have one on your left that is vegetating street with secured full ground planters. Our priority is really to plant full ground and to develop biodiversity in these planters. We also plant what we call the Miyawaki forest on our ring road embankments. The Miyawaki forests are very interesting because they allow to plant very dense forest with very low maintenance, and it's not very costly because you plant a lot of trees and then you let them grow naturally. And the third concept that we develop for vegetation is the urban forest concept that we are now developing in Paris to propose very dense natural areas in symbolic places. So for example, here you have the place of the city hall where we want to plant a lot of trees to cool down this area. Another challenge I wanted to mention, it's more about the economic fabric. It's a bit less about public space, but still there's a big link about it. So we want to revitalize local economic fabric. In Paris, we have more than 62,000 local shops, and we want to defend them and to be sure that they can survive in this period that is very difficult, especially. So we have an operator that is called CMAS, that is public-private, and which role is to preempt premises to be sure that the local shop can come and install their shop in the center of Paris through programs that help them to be connected and to enhance their digital skills. We also develop a label that is Fabriqué à Paris, that means made in Paris. We allow this local shop to test their products in incubators. So what we want to do is to show that there are many positive externalities of revitalized local economic fabrics, and we try to develop qualitative indicators to show that through enhanced activity, attractivity, social bonds, well-being, security, and so on. And also another part is our strategy we develop about new urban logistics. We try to promote logistics by bicycle for the last kilometer. And also we are very aware and worried about the social condition of our delivery men. And we are carrying workshops to enhance it. So I think it's also a very important part of our lively neighborhood. And I wanted to conclude with some words that can be inspirational to overcome these future challenges we will face, with a word that Carlos Moreno was inspired by an author that is called Jane Jacobs, and who said, a neighborhood is not only an association of buildings, but also a network of social relationships, an environment where the feelings and the sympathy can flourish. And the Paris mayor, Anne Hidalgo, is much agreed with this statement. And she said, my project is about proximity, participation, and it's a very important part, the participatory aspect of this project. So participation, collaboration, and ecology. In Paris, we all feel we have no time. We are always rushing, always trying to gain time. That is why I am convinced we need to transform the city so Parisians can learn, do sport, have healthcare, shop within 15 minutes from their home. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies, Alexian. Queda clar que...
Thank you, Alexian. It is obvious that the main challenge for you guys in Paris is that difficulty of transforming and changing social behaviors. It might be easier to impact on the brick and mortar, on the solid infrastructures and the urban space the way it's built, rather than changing these new ways of living and being in a city that are linked to this 15-minute city concept. So it is fundamental to work on that and how to make it possible for citizens, for residents, to appropriate the areas where they live. And we have already pointed out possible solutions to act on educational programs and how to develop these links with the territory. You were talking about street schools. You also spoke about the role played by culture to animate public life, sports as well, as a policy that can instill new life in urban areas. You also mentioned this green city, the new gardens and orchards that can be conducive to well-being and appropriation of the territory where we live. And finally, the significance of thinking about policies that can allow us to reinforce local trade, the local industry. So I believe that those 5 pointers can be quite useful, can come in handy to develop this idea. And it becomes apparent what we should do in the future. So now on to Milan. Francesca, what have been the main challenges you have had to face to implement these proposals you mentioned earlier?
Thank you. First of all, I must say the push to change times and schedules came precisely from the pandemic, but also through new and innovative administrative tools. Now, the hope is that this experimentation can leave a trace between different actors, which can also survive the pandemic phase. At the same time, it must be in mind that urban reorganization in terms of time and space and the way of living the urban space certainly require in-depth studies and subsequent less emergency planning. From a very recent research on real estate scenarios, it emerged that about 10% of households residing in the area would have activated in the last year a potential additional demand for replacement housing, mainly due to the impacts of the pandemic on structural habits. But it is not the pandemic that requires us to rethink the city and its metropolitan area. It is only a powerful accelerator of dynamics already underway. The time has come to take this opportunity to make an important leap in the redefinition of the cultural paradigms of living the city. The housing dimension, which in the pandemic era overwhelmed the narrow meaning of the house to become a place for work, study, interaction, and leisure, is the basic point on which to rework the daily quality of life, where space collective services built on short and medium range networks assumes greater importance. With the words of Pierre Maran, councillor in Milan for urban planning, he said, "We are experiencing an historical phase in which cities need to be rethought. The common goal with other cities is that every citizen has 15 minutes from home, all the services they need. This does not mean relegating our lives to smaller spaces, but changing strategy compared to a recent past where, from commerce to healthcare, the goal was to concentrate everything in a few specialized places. In Milan, there are 1,400,000 residents in 88 neighborhoods called local identity zones of about 15,000 inhabitants each. Instead, the metropolitan cities has 132 municipalities for a total of more than 3 million inhabitants. We are working to ensure that each territory acquires a new centrality because beyond the emergency, the city 15 minutes away represents the future of large cities. Working on proximity also means analyzing the structural changes of the population, of the families, the emergence of new needs and lifestyles in Milan and its metropolitan area. A big challenge is, in fact, at the level of the city, where a mapping of services is being tested on the basis of indicators within areolas that measures the distance of 50 minutes. Working at the level of metropolitan area is much, much more difficult for the moment. The main indicators were grouped in 5 classes: accessibility, culture, education with services for children, compulsory schools, index of universities, neighborhoods business, medium and large sales structure and commercial areas, and the last one, healthcare facilities. The choice of variables for the construction of the indicators is made by taking into consideration the main factors that contribute to increasing the level of residential attractiveness with respect to the heterogeneous needs of demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I'll remember one of the things that you mentioned, which hasn't been brought up by any other speaker before, but it is indeed a key challenge, which is housing. And how can we deploy this idea of the 15-minute city bearing in mind the building pressure, the real estate pressure that cities are subject to. So the housing issue is indeed significant, even more so after a pandemic that has come to show how access to housing was the pre-requirement to have your right to health ensured. So without having a home, you were not protected against being infected by the virus. So it is indeed a major factor when thinking about this 15-minute city, and to ensure that there's enough social housing, public housing available as well in the different neighborhoods in order to make this possible, that life in districts and small neighborhoods is a reality despite all of these housing-related difficulties that, as I was saying, impact most cities in the world. So, Mariona, now it's the time for the metropolitan area of Barcelona to express what the main challenges have been when implementing the proposals that you presented earlier. Okay. I don't mean to overlap with what I said. Some of the challenges that the cities of Paris and Milan shared with us are shared from our point of view. But as a general challenge, what I would say is that we all have to find a balance between the whole globalization that we're going through and this daily community life. So it's a change in pace, in this rapid pace that the whole globe is experiencing. This hectic rhythm that cities experience. How can we put the brakes on this accelerated rhythm, on this day-to-day, so that we can limit it down, and therefore within this area of 15 minutes or 45, if we take into account the whole metropolitan area, we shouldn't rush through things, and we should be able to enjoy better quality of living and in a more defined space. Now, in terms of challenges for the metropolitan area, I believe that the main challenge is to have all stakeholders on board with this new model, working together so that citizens also accept and adjust to this model with all levels of administration. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Obviously, we are living behind a very significant health crisis, and this poses challenges such as economic recovery and rebuilding this economic and social fabric that has been damaged. And from the point of view of mobility, due to this crisis as well, we have the challenge of regaining trust in public transportation and make it accessible, because there are many situations in terms of residents of a big city. We need to be more efficient than private vehicles. You might think that it's utopian in those terms, but if we think about a private vehicle in a municipality close to the big city, driving to Barcelona, finding a parking spot, and everything that is involved in owning a car, we want to avoid these situations, and we believe that public transport is there to help citizens move every day and make it more compatible. So that's the main challenge for us. I mentioned several such difficulties from different viewpoints, but by way of summary, I hope this suffices. These are the main challenges that we're facing now and we will face in the future. Thank you, Mariona. After hearing your answer, I was thinking, I said earlier that we need to shift our paradigm. We have had an urban model for decades now that is based on functionality. Le Corbusier was probably the intellectual father of this functionalist town planning. He said that a successful city was a fast, rapid city. Mariona, you were just speaking about that. We want to break away with that idea of speed, of a hectic pace that characterizes our cities. Therefore, we want to build cities where the success factor is no longer speed or hyper-connectivity, but rather hyper-proximity and quality of life and social welfare, which is not a minor issue. Now we're going to table some of the questions that have been sent to us through the chat by some of the participants in this event who are listening to us. So I'll just throw the questions at you and you can answer any question that you think is closer to your interests. First, someone was asking, and this person is right, this hasn't been mentioned, and we have seen this during the pandemic. The elderly, senior citizens, as a group that has been highly impacted by COVID-19, that are facing important problems in terms of solitude, for instance, and how can this 15-minute city impact the elderly, our elderly citizens? Are you thinking about specific policies so that this 15-minute city is also beneficial for our senior citizens? And secondly, a question which in this particular case has to do with what our colleague from Milan told us, but I'm sure that maybe our colleague from Paris or Barcelona can participate as well. They were saying, how can we make this proposal of near working a reality in cases such as it happened in metropolitan cities? We know this to be true. The majority of the population that comes to cities to work live elsewhere. They usually reside in other smaller cities in the outskirts of the city, or sometimes in other cities that are well connected to the big metropolis, but not necessarily, they do not reside in the city center. So how can we make this near working possible in these particular cases in which people live in one city and work in a different one? And these probably makes us talk about multi-level governance and such, but it's up to you. Alexiane, we can start with you again, if you wish, so that you can answer, respond to these questions, if you think it's pertinent to your case.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. I will start with the question about elderly people because it's very important question, and it's true that I mentioned that one of our priority in the project we developed in Paris about 15-minute city is to focus and to prioritize the less mobile people and the people that are more isolated, and it includes disabled people, it includes elderly people as well. So it's one of our big challenge to make the street accessible to everyone, so to elderly people, to disabled people, and to propose them also a place in our programmation. And that's why I mentioned in our school streets policy that we want the street and in front of the school, but also the schoolyards, to be accessible to the neighborhood, so to children, but also to their family, but also to more elderly people that will be able to come participate in some animation that can be adapted to them. And we developed a lot of policies in the public space in Paris to adapt our street, our sidewalks to all kind of mobility and to people that are less mobile. So it's a very important challenge, and we try to address it the best we can. So that is my answer to the first question. The second one is very interesting as well. So how do we help people coming from elsewhere than the city center to come to Paris to work? It's a very important matter, and for us in Paris as well. With this, I talked to you a bit about it. So it was the fact that we want to limit the car circulation in a perimeter inside the center of Paris. So we have this challenge because a lot of people come from the suburb to the city center to work, and they come by car. So here we have a big challenge to address, to make sure that these people have alternatives to come to the center of Paris, that they can leave their individual car and take the public transport, take maybe active mobility, so cycling, walking, but they cannot come from the suburb to Paris by bike. It's not possible. So what we try to do at Paris level is to develop parking so that people can come by car to the surrounding of Paris and then leave their car and take a public transport or rent a bike or walk, depending on how far they need to go. And also there's another challenge, but that we cannot address directly at the level of Paris. We need to develop more the public transport so that the suburb can be linked one with another, and better linked also with Paris. But this is a competence of the county and not of the city in France to develop public transport. So this is a talk we try to have, of course, with the county, and we participate in projects, but still we don't have the initiative of it. And it's also not the same political ideas in the city and in the county. So we also try to do our best in this way. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies, Alexian.
Thank you, Alexian. You mentioned this modularity that Mariona also pointed out when she spoke earlier, how to design a kind of transportation that is intermodal, that allows us to combine different possibilities to move around, so that we can come from farther afield to the city center in order to get to work. Francesca, how are you tackling these issues? The elderly, near working, and people who live farther away from the city center.
Yes, thank you for the questions. The first one about elderly people is very, very important, because Milan is one of the more older city in Europe. About more than 30% of the population are over 65 years old. For this reason, the idea of a city 15 minutes is particularly important for them, especially thinking about the health services. The experience in the city of the last years has not been good, because the region level decided to group the services into main places, a few main places, some in many cases hospital, and there are not yet healthy services at the territorial level. For this reason, it is very important to map the situation now and to plan a completely new reorganization of the services. Another reason for elderly people is many of them, especially when they are in difficult, their family move the elderly into public houses, usually not very good for life. The idea, for the moment, is a cultural idea, is to give the possibility to elderly to stay at home and not necessarily to move to public houses. And if this idea wants to be successful, need to get better possibility to move, for elderly to have a sort of a community around their home. Services, also friends, really a community of people. For the second question is in fact, it is absolutely not easy to answer for me, because as I told before, this rethinking of the city life is going on, especially at the city level or the municipality of Milan, because the city, the administration of the municipality of Milan and metropolitan area are not very linked together. Also because the metropolitan area is characterized by 132 administration, and these administration are not of the same color, I mean, from a political point of view. So it's very difficult to link, to create, to find a policy or a way to make a policy together for these municipalities. But one thing is going to be done in a part, in a certain way, as done. I said about the public transportation. The table which was created giving an answer to the government in order to make sure the public transportation don't go over 50% of capacity. And this job was done by the table with the prefect, and linking and creating a mediation between the schools and the agency of public local transport, which work at the double level, municipality and metropolitan area. So I can say that the work is going on, and it's not easy, because public transportation is very is good at the municipality level, but not so good at the level of metropolitan area, where we need much more link between the different lines of railway or buses and so on. And of course, this is a problem also for the specific question about near working. It's not a case that the experimentation is going on at the level of municipality employees. This can be a good example. And as far as we know, a lot of headquarters of multinational companies are distributed, have the offices distributed on the territory, not only in Milan, but also in the peripheral territory and in other cities in metropolitan area. So the hope is some of these private companies decided to get the challenge and to try to use their spaces not only for face-to-face job, but only for a kind of co-near working. Is a challenge. I don't know if we will success or not. I mean the municipality and the administration. But it's a big challenge, and if the idea of change the paradigm of the way of life of the city, and the cities within the metropolitan area, we can hope in a successful project, in a successful process. It's not easy, and in fact, I can't say yes or no. I hope. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for responding the question about the elderly. Obviously, we need to work to guarantee the access to decentralized health services, public services, for those elderly who live scattered throughout the territory. And we need to make policies to build social links and bonds and to build that community around the elderly, which is not a minor aspect, thinking about the mental health of the elderly. And as for near working, as I said before, we will keep a close eye on the news about this initiative in Milan to know about its outcome. It's, of course, a proposal that for the time being will be applied to civil servants working for the local authority. And let's see if some private companies decide to embark on this journey. But as Alexian said, we have to tackle this matter through a metropolitan lens. And of course, that means to establish and design sustainable mobility options and in dialogue with other administrations, which is not always an easy task. And you both mentioned the difficulty of working with an administration that is controlled by a different political party. Mariona, I will hand it over to you, and I'd like to mention something an attendee posted on the chat about the elderly. How could you improve the safety of the elderly who walk and stroll on the sidewalk in a space in which private vehicles take control of the public space, and that can mean insecurity or lack of safety for the elderly? So I would pose that question to you, and then we will wrap up on some final questions and a final round of answers, and we will bring this session to an end. But before that, Mariona, please tell us about the elderly, near working, and well, the floor is yours. Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much. And thank you to the attendees who posted questions. I mentioned universal accessibility before, and I said one of the measures that links up beautifully with the last question on the chat about the elderly safety when walking on the street. Well, one of the measures I mentioned before is to guarantee the safety of walking, which is included in road safety, in the road safety work stream that we have in the plan. That focuses on the elderly and on anyone who basically moves around on foot in the metropolitan area. And the municipalities have powers in their own territory, and we work together. In, well, the urban planning the master plan, the urban master plan focuses on that. And it's about road signs, pacification of the spaces, sidewalk design, and also the usages of vehicle spaces and pedestrian spaces, and taking all aspects into account to guarantee the physical safety of pedestrians and other people who take part in active mobility. Now, thinking about the elderly, as I mentioned before, one additional measure that we try to implement in our plan is to improve the environment and the accessibility to bus stops and train stations. I also mentioned the improvement of universal accessibility. This, of course, applies to everyone, but specifically to the elderly. And that's the vision that we have as the metropolitan area. As I said at the very beginning, we need to promote social cohesion. It has to be an egalitarian mobility. That's one of the key aspects of the plan. And when we say inclusivity, we refer to the most vulnerable groups, but also other groups, the rest of citizens, to feel part and parcel of the metropolitan mobility, public transportation, and the territory at large. So, other examples, we have also kicked off a system for women and other vulnerable groups to ask for an on-demand bus stop to try and support women who travel on the bus by night, and to basically give them peace of mind and allow them not to be scared, to have a bus stop closer to their homes. And the same applies to the elderly. If they feel they are in such a vulnerable situation, they can ask for an on-demand bus stop, as long as their bus belongs to one of these services. And in the future, more services will include that. And to wrap up, of course, the elderly are considered in our plan and in all the actions that we take as the Department of Mobility, Transport and Sustainability and the Metropolitan Area Authority at large. As for near working, well, as the mobility department, we don't have so much clout, but we have a Department of Economic Development, and they have the PROPAM plan that defines different social policies and economic recovery policies. For example, they promote basically the employment of the youth, the adaptation of workplaces, promotion of co-working spaces, as Francesca mentioned. They also foster the women's entrepreneurship to try and develop this innovation fabric in the metropolitan area, and many other initiatives and support schemes, so that at a corporate level and commercial level, new ideas can be implemented to focus on the proximity of the economic fabric, and that the economic fabric of the metropolitan area is closer to the citizens, and it does not concentrate in the city of Barcelona, but it is scattered throughout the metropolitan area. Of course, the model does not include people moving houses to be able to live in a 15-minute city. It's about taking on this metropolitan perspective and this 45-minute commuting approximately, and with that have access to everything you need for your daily life. Thank you very much, Mariona. I said I would ask 2 last questions to wrap up, but I will only ask one because we're not doing very well time-wise. And I would really ask you to be very brief, to go straight to the point in your responses. But I would like to ask you the following. I mean, today's session has been a very interesting space to get to know from other cities' experiences, to learn from each other. To what extent do you think it would be useful to have a networking platform at a European level to promote the sharing of experiences exchanges among cities. Alexis said at the beginning that here in Catalonia, we have a network of municipalities for time use reform. So to what extent a similar initiative at a European level could be an interesting thing to you? Alexian.
Thank you for this question, Eva. Actually, indeed, I very much agree with you that it would be very useful and very interesting to have this kind of platform and network of exchange of best practices between cities, because we can see in our daily work when we want to implement new projects that are a bit about like innovating about active mobility, about 15-minute city. What we do first is, as I guess everyone does, but we do a benchmark. So we go into websites, we try to contact some of our colleagues in different European cities, and we ask them how they did, if they already tried to implement the kind of project we also want to implement in Paris. And for example, it's very much the case for our new area that will be in the center of Paris and that will be restricted and where we will not allow transit traffic anymore. So what we did is that we tried to see what Italy did, because I think that Rome, Milan also implemented this kind of restricted traffic zone. So we try to see how they implement it, what modality, how they control this kind of zone and everything. So it's just an example to actually justify how this kind of organized network of sharing best practices, sharing maybe experience of how they implement this kind of project, what their difficulties were, how the public liked or didn't like the project, and everything is very much interesting. So thank you, that was my answer.
Gracias, Alexian.
Thank you, Alexian. Francesca?
Absolutely. Thank you. I agree to this proposal. In every kind of job is very mainly if an innovative job is very, very important to have the possibility to share, to compare, also to study, because maybe we can have some example in our territory and not existing in other cities. So, but in other cities, we can find other different kind of example of experimentation. And for this reason, it's very important to understand, to look, to study what is happening in other cities. We can have some cases where citizens are not, they don't like what the local authority is going to do. But if the same example exists in other cities and people are good with this example, we can use also this situation, this result, to convince the citizens in our cities. So absolutely, I think it should be very, very important. The last thing is a big challenge, I think, in Italy and in Milan, is to the local authority. Is not easy to transfer the idea of a city 15 minutes in a global concept, where the different actions are are something something coherent. There are many different actions, singular, divided from the other. And from this point of view, looking at other experience, cultural, intellectual experience can be very, very useful for also for the political the councillors in Milan, and also for the bureaucracy, which, as far as I know, usually is difficult to change the mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Mariona? Yeah, I agree 100% with my colleagues from Paris and Milan. Obviously, sharing experiences at a European level can help politically and technically for those of us who work for the public administration to make this idea come true. And also it can help citizens, just like Francesca said, to convince for people to buy into the proposal. The fact that other cities have implemented the idea and are ahead of us, well, we can get to know how citizens see it in other cities and get to know citizens who live in other European cities. So it's a lovely idea, absolutely. And it goes without saying that we have different cultural environments and realities in Europe, and sometimes the lifestyle and the time uses are connected to the territory and to where you live. So being able to share that can be very helpful to all of us. Thank you very much, Mariona. Thank you, Alexiana and Francesca, for having responded to all the questions that we have asked you and for having shared how you are deploying this notion of the 15-minute city from your cities. We could devote much more time to this discussion. There are many pending questions, but we have to wrap up and bring this session to an end. And with your last remarks, it's made apparent that a European network could be very helpful and could play a key role to promote the deployment of 15-minute cities throughout Europe. So the two organizations who have invited us today to discuss this topic, the Barcelona Time Initiative for a Healthy Society and the Diplocat, could take on this challenge and promote some sort of platform along these lines. Thank you, Alexian, Francesca, and Mariona. I want to thank all the attendees for your attention, and we will keep discussing these matters. We'll be in touch and see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca. It was very insightful and inspiring what you shared with us about Milan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.